sail, if you point this boat into the wind, kind of helps him steer, because if the boat's pointed into the wind and it swings one way or the other in the swell, the wind will tend to push it back into line with the wind. And so when the wind's really strong, the seas are really bad, probably doesn't help much. But on a moderately breezy day, it's enough of an assist that you see a lot of the boats with those. This is a real good time to fish for lobsters around here. This is kind of in this area, the early part of the really good season for fishing. It goes on some years into November and December. And a lot of people think that the flavor's more delicate because since they're more watery, they don't have that sort of sharp edge that hard-shell lobster has. It's a preference. About the history of any place in North America, you'd have to talk about the American Indians that were here long before the Europeans arrived. We really don't know a whole lot about the American Indians that were here along the coast when people began arriving in the 15th century, 16th century to fish in the Gulf of Maine. Portuguese fishermen and Basque fishermen, English fishermen would come across to catch the tremendous schools of codfish that occurred in the Gulf of Maine. They set up fish camps all along the shore and on the islands, and they found American Indians here. But the reports that we get from them are relatively few, so we don't know very much about them. Whether the French would have the upper hand along the coast here and the English would have the upper hand. The people wanted to see up at the north end of Somes Sound. Abraham Somes came in, set up a homestead, and it wasn't long before other people followed him. And by 1800, 40 years later, there were people living in a number of different places on the main island, as well as the islands off the coast here. And so this made sense to be along the coast. And people like to live on the islands for a number of reasons, like little Cranberry Island, which was settled back in the late 1700s. The islands were insular, and so if you were out there with your family, nobody was going to come along and tell you what to do. You could be quite self-sufficient, and the islanders were. But there was another good reason to do that, too. You and I, when we want to go out to the fishing grounds, we hop in a boat, we turn the motor on, and we go out there in an hour or two. We're where the lobsters are, where the fish are, or whatever. Half a day at the most, and we're going a long way. But back when you had to sail or row out to where the fish were, it just made sense to be as close to the fish as you could be. So if you lived on the islands, you were a lot closer to the fish than if you lived on the mainland on the big island. The people who lived on the islands were farmers as well as fishermen, and they'd have a farm that have livestock and grew their own meat, their milk, their eggs. They had cattle for plowing, they had cattle for milk and meat, they had cattle for leather, and a lot of the times the sons would learn how to make shoes and make shoes for the whole family, although they say no one really ever expected to have dry feet. And since there were relatively few people, it didn't really press on the resources that much. That's the main island. This is Mount Desert Island that we've been sailing by here. Let's see. Actually, no, this is Sutton Island. And our osprey nest is going to be right around here. Probably have to look with binoculars, but just on the other side of the pier as we clear the island, you can look over and see the Bear Island light. Do you remember Bear Island when we just... There's a wonderful book available. It's written with a nice touch of appreciation for the islanders and the men of the sea, and a very strong and quite elegant philosophy of life that came out of the lifestyle of these people who lived on the island. fog signal. They don't have a buoy or a bell or a gong. It's just a visual marker of a channel or a ledge. This is the Northeast Harbor fleet here. These little sleek sailboats, the red and the yellow one there, are in a design that if you sail much, you probably recognize as what they call the International One design. The Northeast Harbor fleet, for the most part, is all of those same kind of boats. The idea being that if you're in the same boat, it's your sailing skill that makes you a good sailor, helps you win the race. And so if you come by, you can see all of the mooring buoys out here. If we were here a month and a half ago, we probably would have seen 15 or 20 or more boats moored here, and then others sailing and racing out here in the waters of the Great Harbor of Mount Desert. This is a Hinkley yacht right here, a 3 o'clock blue yacht with the the gold mark along the gunnel and the curlicues at either end. Hinkleys are famous worldwide. They're one of the first boats to use fiberglass in their building, and they're built on the island here. Hinkley Boat Company is over in Southwest Harbor on the Manson Shore, and they are one of about 35 boat builders on the island. So that tradition that started back in the late 1700s of using the wood on the island to build boats in the harbors and coves, that tradition has continued, although a lot of boat builders are using more modern material. A builder of wooden boats that are excellent boats. Greening Island here. Of the islands along the coast, people with some wealth. Greening Island was never farmed. All of the other islands, even ones that today, like Sutton, are mostly summer residents, at one time or another were farmed, but not Greening. The houses, these don't look like farmhouses or fishermen's houses, you're right. Because back in about 1850, things here begin to change after a century and a half of people just using the land, living here and working. Back in the 1840s and 50s, some painters begin to come up here and coast to their liking, and so painted pictures of the surf and Cadillac Mountain, the coves and inlets. Room in somebody's house, ate their simple fare, lived in their simple quarters. And the people who came to the 1860s, the move to come to Maine for the summer was on again. Large wooden hotels began going up around the island. The Astor Inn that we saw there at the mouth of Northeast Harbor was one. Our harbor at one time had 10 or 15 huge 400, 500, 600 room wooden hotels where people would come, and they really were sort of our spiritual forebears in the sense of, not their religion, but in the sense of what they were doing here, because they came here to recreate. They thought it was pretty just like we think it's pretty, and they came and they walked the shore, and they dug around in the tide pools, and they walked to the top of the mountains, and they built trails through the woods, and they were doing what we're doing. They were enjoying the peace and beauty of one of the prettiest places anywhere in the country. Among the people who came to those hotels were the wealthy people of the U.S. The Industrial Revolution was going, and people were making great fortunes. The people like Rockefeller and Ford, Morgan, and others came to these islands, and they stayed in the hotels, but they had to rub shoulders with the riffraff, and that wasn't good. And so they began building their own elaborate summer cottages in Bar Harbor, in Northeast Harbor, Southwest Harbor, many places along here. And so when you look up along the shore here, what you're seeing are the summer cottages. People who did have some money could come and spend the whole summer. I think I mentioned before. Offshore here, drove the Indians back into the. That was the last of that colony. If you look on your charts now, we're sailing up into. dark neck there, you can't tell, but if you stretch that bird out, they're over 30 inches long from the tip of their bill to the tip of their tail. So a very large bird. They're diving birds, and sometimes if you watch the cormorants, you'll see them dive forward like that. But the loons, a lot of times when they're going to dive, they'll just dive a couple of 100 feet below the surface. They can stay down for long periods of time. You'll see a loon dive, and then it'll be minutes before they come back up, and they'll come up 50 yards away or something. And yet, when they're down under the water, they're using their feet to swim with, and they're chasing fish down and catching them. So really tremendous divers. But because their feet are on the backs of their bodies to help them propel themselves through the water, when they're on the land, they're almost incapacitated. They can't get around very well at all. They can barely walk. A lot of times just flop around on their belly. And so they nest where the water doesn't rise and fall on the tide line. So they have to go to the inland lakes to nest. So we see a progression every year. So we see them in the spring. They kind of disappear in the summertime, except for a very few out here on these salt waters. You see them on the lakes. And then when the springtime, or when the fall comes, they're out here again. And we see more and more starting in the middle of August. Don't worry about me. Go ahead and sing out. We'll try to get everybody a look at one. Northeast Harbor Swim Club, they would let the gates open at Blue Hill Bay, or on the other side of Frenchman Bay. But a lot of times people would come by steamship, and that's one of the wharfs where they landed. He's on the left, up there at about 323 now. For about 15 years, they just held the land themselves, But in 1916, they talked the federal government into accepting the land that they 1919 and became Acadia National Park in 1929. And up until a couple of years ago, Acadia National Park was the only national park in the system in which all of the land was land that had been donated by private individuals. None of Acadia was reserved from or taken out of public lands. None of it was bought by the government, again, until just the last couple of years. So really intriguing and really quite a legacy that these people left. John D. Rockefeller Jr. played an important role, as he also did in the creation of Grand Teton National Park. But George Dorr and Samuel Eliot and other people who summered in Northeast Harbor or some of the other towns around the island had a crucial role to play and enjoyed seeing the beautiful scenery, the interesting wildlife, as I always do when I come out. Then let me talk you into keeping a thought in your mind as you leave the boat, as you go to other places on the island, enjoy the park and the rest of the beautiful landscape here. Remember that the scenery, this wildlife, this relative lack of development didn't come about by accident. It came about because there was someone at some point who said, it's worth protecting, it's worth saving, let's put some energy into this, let's put some commitment into this. And so we have these things to enjoy because somebody else before us made a commitment and did some work. Realize then that there's still a lot of work to be done to protect our environment, to set aside other wild places, so that more people who come after us, growing populations, can enjoy these places just as we do. I'll come around and get your charts now.
So, and it's hard to find them when it's that rough, or foggy too. But they'll tell you what they've been seeing. So after that, but there's still a few fish out there. I don't think anybody's seen a humpback in 3 weeks now. Remember, if you will, to keep seated until we get settled at the dock.
Is that the one they take?